The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows. Hello, I'm Thomas Salerno, and you're listening to The Secrets of Fantasia, the 1940 Walt Disney classic that combines the best of concert and cinema to create an unforgettable experience. And joining me today on the panel are Kathryn Laffrey. Hello, Kathryn.
Hello.
And Victor Lambs. Hello, Victor.
Hey, we're not talking about Fantasia Barrino, the American Idol contestant?
What?
Oh, yeah. That's funny because today I was looking up like GIFs for Fantasia and like half of them were her.
Sorry to derail you there.
No, that's fine. Half the fun of this show is, I think, being derailed on stuff. But be sure to follow us on The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows on your podcast app of choice. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn, and iHeartRadio. And also you can follow along with the show on the StarQuest YouTube channel. And please do us a favor by sharing the podcast with your friends because we've got a lot of great movies and shows to discuss coming up very soon. And you can follow along on social media where we are at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia or on X, as we're now calling it, where we are at SQPN, or on Instagram, where we are at StarQuest Network. I don't know why it didn't occur to me to talk about Fantasia on this show earlier, but I just had Fantasia on the mind recently, and I'm like, you know what? This is a good excuse as any to watch this movie again, because Fantasia was on in my home a lot when I was a kid. I think my mom knew that if she needed me to sit down and be quiet, she could just put the VHS for Fantasia in and have 2 hours where she could go and do something else while I would be transfixed on the TV. But I haven't watched it a lot as an adult as much as I did as a kid, and I really wanted to rectify that. But yeah, what's your guys' history with Fantasia? Have any of you seen it in theaters since? Because I know it was in theaters since 1940 when it was made, but it's made the rounds since then a few times, right?
Yeah, I saw it, I think, for the first time in the theaters in the mid 1980s, I think around 1985. My grandmother was an artist, an oil painter, and did a lot of paintings with mystical and religious themes. And so she took me to see it. And it just blew my mind as a kid. I remember my dad talking about trying to go see the 1969 release at the State Theater in Ann Arbor. At that time, Disney was billing it as a psychedelic experience.
Oh,
and
no.
He said the smoke of undetermined substance in the theater was so thick that he couldn't see the screen, so he left. But yeah, and then when Fantasia 2000 came out, I think it was a double bill with Fantasia and Fantasia 2000 at one of the IMAX theaters in 1999, I think it was. And I saw it again then. But yeah, I hadn't seen it in 24 years. And coming back to it now, it's one of those things where you always pick up something new when you watch it again.
Yeah, and it's been part of my art life as long as I can remember. I remember seeing bits of it in science class in elementary school when we had to learn about dinosaurs because they used to put out the shorts for that. And then I'm sure, I don't remember right off the hand when, but I'm sure I saw it in the 80s because any time Disney got re-released, I had to go watch it. I used my little sister as an excuse to go with me. I was in high school then in art class, so a big influence on me as an artist. Just seeing all this. And I love the fact now that I can stream it and just stop and enjoy it frame by frame.
I know, right? I did that several times during my latest rewatch of just stopping and just staring at the screen. I'm like going, wow, this is just beautiful. Some of the animation, I don't know a whole ton about the technical side of animation, but I'm thinking to myself, this was 1940. And the stuff that they were accomplishing, and the stuff they were accomplishing here is just spellbinding.
Yeah, my DVD version, the 60th anniversary edition, they had tons of interviews with the animators from Fantasia. Oh my gosh, they are like my go-to guys to listen to talk about art. They're incredible. But listening to, I don't know if it was Ollie or one of the other ones talking about how it's 24 frames per second, and each frame to go from the original concept art to all the layers of the cells was hours or days of work with probably up to 20 people working on it because you had specialists doing airbrushing and dry brushing and all that to get all the effects that happened. So it's just amazing how many hours went into this.
Yeah, and from the technical side too, Walt Disney, of course, had very talented artists, but he also had very talented engineers who were inventing basically new ways to film animation and new ways to film cinema. One of his great contributions was the multi-plane camera where you could layer up all of those individual cells. So you look at one frame, you're like, oh, that's a drawing someone drew. No, actually, it's 7 drawings that probably, like you said, 20 or 100 people drew. And that's how you're able to do like the push-ins and pull-outs through and all the parallax, that scrolling and stuff that he was known for. But yeah, I wanted to pause frame by frame, but I was watching it with my 10-year-old, and he was just spellbound. It's the first time watching it all the way through, and he was just spellbound through the whole thing. So I didn't want to interrupt that. But this is just from a color theory perspective. Any frame of this, you could pause and take the colors just out of that frame and build a brand or a design just around the colors in that one frame.
And the matching of the color with the sound.
Yeah.
Disney just says, oh my gosh, they do the best color sound magic ever to affect the mood and to get you to understand when they have those deep tones and the deep reds and purples, and it just heightens everything. It's incredible.
Yeah, I don't know if synesthesia was an official diagnosis at the time, but it's pretty obvious that a lot of people who have those perceive colors as sounds or sounds as colors, it's pretty clear they had quite a few. Oh,
I am one of those people. I've actually heard a tree sing in the fall.
Oh, wow.
I seem to associate numbers with different colors. So
that could be a form of it too. But yeah, you could tell that obviously some people working on it and when it came out, not everyone was a fan. Going back through some of my books, I did find an anecdote that Frank Lloyd Wright at some point in 1938 or 1939, when it was coming together, visited Walt Disney at his studios, and Walt Disney very excitedly showed off what this concept he was working on of like setting these motion and animations to music. And Frank Lloyd Wright, the architect, was disgusted. He thought that you should not at all be setting music to it would detract too much from the music. And so he recommended that Walt Disney take a long vacation and reconsider his plans.
What?
That's the story. Yeah. And at the time it came out, that was common complaint too. It's just that, the visuals are taking away too much from the music, which now that seems very quaint. We understand that visuals and music work together in cinema, but this wasn't too many years after the introduction of sound in cinema, and not too many years after the introduction of color into cinema too. One reviewer at the time, and I can't remember which publication it was, but she was so overwhelmed by this and felt that it was like brutalistic, like she was being assaulted by these colors and sounds, and actually walked out.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what it was like going into one of those theaters for the first time that had dozens of extra speakers no one had ever experienced before, and just be overwhelmed by the sound? Yeah, I could see that probably throwing someone a little sideways.
I don't think anything like this had ever been attempted.
No, and you mentioned, Kathryn, the extra speakers. Disney actually had people working on surround sound for the first time, Fantasia sound, specifically for this. They'd go into the theaters and, like you said, add in all the extra speakers. At one point, he wanted scents, like smells.
Smell-o-vision.
Yep.
Yeah, he wanted smell-o-vision at one point. And yeah, it was incredible, just the resources and the people and the workers that were all thrown at this project.
You get the idea, listening to some of the things they say at the beginning of the movie, that Disney didn't mean for this movie to be a one-off, that it was supposed to be the beginning of a whole new genre of cinema, essentially.
Yeah, and again, this wasn't a commercial success at the time, and there's a number of factors for that. Basically, the entire European market had been cut off by the war at the time, so you're missing out there. But yeah, and then they did revisit it in the mid to late 40s with the Make Mine music and Melody Time, but those were more around like popular music of the Andrews Sisters, and definitely not at this scale.
Yeah, and I'm glad I went back. And it just, for me, like I said, it was on so often when I was a kid that it was more of I wasn't just experiencing the movie. I was also experiencing those kind of nostalgic memories of just being a kid and just having this movie on. And I never became like a music person, despite how often I watched this movie. Okay, In high school, we had a Gregorian chant schola. And that's the only music thing I've ever been like associated with. But I even without knowing really anything about music or about color theory or anything like that, I could just appreciate how stunningly just beautiful this movie is. And just the genius of people, not just Walt Disney, but his entire team. He must have just assembled the absolute best artists and filmmakers in the world to do this.
Yeah, I can't speak for how it was to work for him.
I've heard that was a bit of a thing, yeah.
But the results speak for themselves. Just in terms of the movie itself, the framing device that we're introduced to, I think, is very effective. The movie opens and we're not immediately thrown into the world of animation. We get the curtain opening, if I recall, and we get the orchestra tuning up.
Yeah.
For a good solid minute, maybe longer, of just we're introduced to the various instruments. And it's all, I can't imagine just how amazing this must have looked too. Was it Kodak Color or Technicolor?
Technicolor.
Just the lights, the different colored gels shining on the different members of the orchestra.
That warm-up took me right back to high school symphony band. When we put on our tuxedos and get ready to do a big concert. And you're sitting on the stage and you're supposed to warm up and or just even going to the Detroit Symphony as a kid and hearing the band warm up and the symphony warm up, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Just the warm up was amazing.
And we come back to it too after the intermission, and it has like a little fun spin put on it. But yeah, it draws you in. And then the first person we really see is Deems Taylor, who was a 20th century composer and music critic, wrote a lot about music. When he addresses the audience, us, and tells us what we're about to see, which I thought was really cool. And he's there to, before each piece, say, okay, here's what you're going to see in this piece, so that when you do see it, you're like, oh yeah.
Which is funny as an artist. The more abstract things get, the more you have to explain them. And if a picture's supposed to say 1,000 words and you got to add 1,000 words to explain your picture, you might be going off the deep end.
And the first segment is pretty much all abstractions, right? It's box.
As he calls it, absolute music.
Absolute music,
Yeah, he comes up with this framework at the beginning, which I'm not familiar with. There's representational art, and then, like you say, abstract art. And so he's acting as our concert program. You would read down in here. Oh, this is about the centaurs and the Pegasus. Okay, and how long is this one? Okay, it's over when Zeus does this, that sort of thing. But yeah, go ahead. Yeah, because we're thrown into it, and we don't see any animation for the first 8 minutes.
And the first bit, it's Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor, which I've always associated this music with either Dracula or Phantom of the Opera. It just seems to be like culturally associated with those two figures that do famous thing. But for some reason, my brain completely forgot it was in Fantasia. And so I was pleasantly surprised by that.
It's the warm-up. It's definitely the warm-up act here. But it's, as a keyboard player, it's a very fun piece to play. Most of Bach is just fun to play because once you get it under your fingers, the way your fingers move, you could tell Bach was a keyboard player himself. The way your fingers move, it's just very like satisfying and gratifying. But yeah, as you say, it's been used all over. Gyros, the Konami video game from the 80s, used it heavily. But we're definitely into just the orchestra, the lights, and then things start to get a little weird.
Yeah. They actually, tried to bring in, is it Oscar Fischinger as inspiration? And they just, I guess he's out there as far as his abstraction. That's why Dean talked about geometric shapes and color, because that's all that guy did. But Disney knew that would be a little too far out there. So you get the strings of the instruments floating by or the bow of the violins dancing along the clouds. Because you can't just throw people into abstraction because you get lost. Like he said, this is absolute music for music's sake or art for art's sake. It's a pretty selfish mode to be in. Because you don't care about your viewer or listener when you're going that abstract, because you're not trying to bring them to something more. You're just, this is what I decided was beautiful kind of thing. But I liked how Disney did a blend where it's a more dreamlike, a little more surreal.
Yeah, we get the swooping, like you mentioned, the bows of the instruments all kind of marching along. And I love how every time a note is added, like a bow is added, and then they just like dive bomb through the clouds. And then we get some really cool things where you could tell it was maybe filmed and the artists were using the reference, but of the strings of the instruments on the bridges, like rotating and coming at you in 3D.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think Disney would do something this kind of 3D until maybe like The Great Mouse Detective in the 80s, where they were actually like hand drawing over computer generated cells, but it's very effective. And I read that Walt Disney, and who knows how serious he was, he actually wanted to make this like a 3D movie with the glasses and everything at one point. Yeah, obviously they probably scrapped that pretty early on, but it's really stunning because you're not really expecting anything from the 1940s to have that amount of like perspective and 3D and stuff.
The amount of work that the animators do looking at and filming real things to get their ideas.
Yeah.
For any cloud or smoke effect, I guess they said that they were out in the lot playing with blowing things up or burning things in trash cans and just getting different. They would take like high contrast footage and then work on colorizing that to be a layer of one of the layers within each like cell of the movie.
Yeah, that later on, I think in The Rite of Spring, when they're like doing some of the evolution things and they're doing like the kind of wash, like billowy kind of dust cloud effect and stuff.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, that isn't drawn. That's film that they've colored. But yeah, this now you can think of it as like a visualizer. Ever since the days of early Windows, we've had music visualizers where you play your MP3 or WMA files and it draws lines on the screen and stuff. And I'm surprised maybe somebody's done it. I spent a lot of time kind of playing around with those from a software perspective in the late 90s, but I'm surprised no one has actually like recreated the Fantasia Bach toccata in fugue and D minor as a visualizer for your own music. That might be a fun programming project for somebody.
And the next section is more of music that I guess more people would know. It's the Nutcracker Suite by Tchaikovsky.
Before we jump ahead, there's one thing. There's a Catholic reference that we need to get to in the images of Toccata. And it was partway through when you start hearing these crescendos of sound and you'll get these bright images coming up and they're Gothic arches.
Oh, yeah, the stained glass windows.
And they're showing them in groups of three. So we're getting that strong Trinitarian reference. There's all these little moments of that where what art is really supposed to do is point you to that source of beauty. And you can't get away from it. You can try to be as abstract as you want, but you get those elements in there and there's a source of beauty. And just seeing Leopold with his hands just throwing those up into the air was awesome.
Oh, yes. We should mention Leopold as well. Leopold Stokowski. Stokowski, yes. Sorry.
The conductor.
Easy for you to say.
Yes.
The conductor. But yeah, he actually, when Walt Disney reached out to him, he reached out to Walt Disney. He said he would do it for free. That's not what they agreed on. They agreed on several tens of, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars for his involvement. But yeah, and so of course he walks out and I turned to my 10-year-old. I'm like, on that Bugs Bunny cartoon where they're all going like, Leopold.
Oh, yeah.
That's him.
Yes. That was only 8 years later that they did that.
Yeah. So obviously a very conscious Fantasia reference on there.
I'm sure all these animators were just like always wanted to reference one another's work. I'm sure they were all fans of what each other was doing. One thing I wasn't aware of is that I'm forgetting his name already, our guide.
Deems Taylor?
Deems Taylor, yeah. He says nobody performs the Nutcracker Ballet nowadays. And I'm like, that's news to me. I'm like, really?
I think Fantasia may have changed that.
May have been the thing that brought it back. Yeah, because we have the Nutcracker Suite, which I guess is like a medley of some of the more famous pieces because it's a lengthy ballet, I'm sure, but
yeah, the Nutcracker Suite, I think, is when she's being presented by the gifts or something, and everybody's bringing out their presents, and the presents are all these like ethnic types doing their dances.
Yeah, because there's the different dances have names. I actually saw this when I was looking. There's the Russian dance, there's the Chinese dance, there's
the Arab dance, which we get a sexy goldfish.
Oh,
that part,
the Arab dance. Yeah, that was weird.
Because it's supposed to be like a veil dance, like the dance of the seven veils, where the fish's tail is the veils. It doesn't really work that well. I think it's the only part of the opening that doesn't work for me. But we get the fairy sprites of the different seasons.
Right. Nothing about the Nutcracker here. He's been excised. And I feel like the Nutcracker Suite must be, and I don't want to get too deep into this, but what the silly disclaimer that you have to sit through at the beginning when you watch this on Disney Plus, they make you sit through about 10 seconds of a disclaimer being on the screen, which, says that there's going to be hurtful material.
Negative portrayals that are harmful. They were wrong then, they're wrong now, but in the interest of
really? What are we even talking about?
Well-
And when I'm like, it has to be this part.
Well, there's a scene cut from the later segment.
The pastoral,
The Pastoral Symphony, where they had
okay.
Yeah, they had
but that
some
was
characters
done during Walt Disney's time.
Yeah, if you slow it down, there's a moment where the Centaurettes are getting ready. And there's one section of it where they've actually zoomed way in and you're only seeing one small section of the actual film.
Okay, that's how they got around it. I was wondering how they cut out like 2 characters without.
Yeah, you see her prepping her hair and you can tell she's looking at someone, but they've completely cropped out who she's looking at.
Oh, that didn't click for me for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think they are referring to the mushrooms, or I don't think they're referring to the Russian weeds or the Russian dandelions or thistles or whatever they are. And also the weird goldfish. But
that goldfish, though, she's from Pinocchio.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There was
Cleo
to talk about that too. Yeah, Cleo.
And Pinocchio was out just before this.
I think it was even the same year, right? 1940.
Yeah, they were working on Bambi and Dumbo during this. And so later on, there's a bit with elephants. You can tell that they were, and all the early water here looks like Pinocchio water. Mm-hmm. So you can tell that they were cross-pollinating.
Right. Oh, we'll get to the water in the next part. Yeah, but it's like the Nutcracker Suite. I'm not sure there's much to say about it. I remember when...
What? There's everything to say about it.
No, but when I was a kid, I was like, I just want to get to Mickey and the dinosaurs. And so I would sit through this part, but it's not like I would fast forward or anything. But the whole time I would be thinking, next is Mickey and after that is the dinosaurs. But no,
for me, this was my favorite book come to life. My grandmother used to read us a 1920s book called The Bam Clock Fairies. And if you get a chance, look it up. The book is still out there, probably in more like used bookstores. But there's all these little fairies that look a lot like these seasonal fairies that are helping this little girl who's late for everything to get back on schedule. And so it's the little Bam clock. It'll ring and the fairies come out and help her through her little daily chore. But so it's a nostalgia thing for me.
I do like the fairies in this. I don't know if that was Fred Moore or Ward Kimball who would always draw like the little fairies, and eventually they put it into movie. But it's in the segment where we see some of the snowflakes spinning around.
Oh,
and you're like, are those like, did they use a computer? Obviously, they didn't use a computer, but they actually had a rig, like basically clockwork underneath these snowflakes. And then they covered it with like black fabric so you wouldn't see the mechanics. And when those are actual a mechanism spinning those things as they film them. So really interesting, what they're able to do. But so I think it's fine. The mushrooms, if that's the offensive part, I guess they were inspired by the Three Stooges, like the comedy antic. Like just running around. But if you watch it, it's like mind-bending because you think that there's like a short, a tall, and then a normal sized mushroom, and you're trying to watch it, and then the mushrooms like change size and shape as they run around.
Yes.
And so it's an optical illusion. It breaks your brain a little bit.
All the mushrooms remind me of, and this will not be the last time I reference this game in the course of our discussion, but the mushrooms remind me from these they're enemies in the game Kingdom Hearts, where they're these little mushroom people, and if you do a certain spell in front of them, they will either give you extra health or extra MP or extra items and stuff, but they look just like the little mushrooms in that segment, so that's all I was thinking of.
Yeah, I loved how the fairies would change the seasons, because as a kid and being an artsy kid, I could get lost in a spider web any day of the week. It's like just looking at something like that, or going out for a walk and watching the dewdrops on something, or seeing the frost. And for me, I would always go, okay, how would I draw this? How would I paint this? And trying to figure it out in my head when I see it. So it was really neat. It was fun to see when they were changing the fall leaves, and then to hear the commentary that they said some of the leaves, they were just going out into the parking lot and drawing whatever plants they thought looked good. But then you're watching them as if they were like leaves on a tree, and you go, wait, that's like a house plant. That's not a tree that would change color like that. But you just have to go, okay, it's Fantasia. Let it be Fantasia.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, the dewdrops on the spider web, the leaves changing color, and then the leaves falling, the stuff on the water, the flowers on the water and stuff. It's just very... Part of you is just like, how did they do that? But otherwise, you're just like, wow, this is really beautiful.
then you stop and think about it. It's all the math that had to go into that. There's all that beauty in drawing, but then to know that they had to sing this with every beat of the music.
Yeah.
Because that was the whole point, was like being perfectly coordinated with the music. It wasn't just music as a sound effect. It is the music come to life. So it was just to think about everything that went into all those little details is amazing. It's mind-blowing.
Now everybody's favorite part.
Not everybody. I love this part, but my favorite part, for reasons that will become clear, is actually the next one. But yeah, Sorcerer's Apprentice is probably the most iconic section of the film. And I think, as you say in our notes, Victor, it kind of made Mickey the cultural icon that he is.
Yeah, it certainly relaunched his career. We think of Mickey as like this juggernaut that's always been popular, but by this point in the late 30s, he was like a black and white goofy cartoon character, but this really elevated him. They redesigned his character, actually gave him pupils for the first time, made him more 3D, gave him more of a personality than just getting in Pete's business all the time. But yeah, and so from that perspective, it's an important cultural touchstone. But I think when they did Fantasia 2000, they just lifted this right out of this movie and put it into Fantasia 2000, which is what the idea was, is that Fantasia would be taking bits and pieces from previous Fantasias, adding new stuff and things like that. But this is really impressive cartooning going on here.
Yeah, this was Mickey's first modern workup and making him more childlike.
Yeah, because some of the early Mickey cartoons are very adult in nature. And that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah. He definitely went through some major like Mickey as we know him now is a very different character from what he was in his initial outings. Yeah. But even the outfit that he wears in this segment is iconic. Everyone knows it. The pointy hat with the moons and stars on it with the red robe. And even the wizard character from the beginning has appeared in other stuff. He was in the Kingdom Hearts video games. He's been in other video games. So yeah.
Epic Mickey. Epic Mickey.
Yeah.
Warren Spector's very experimental Disney games, which I still don't know how they let him make it, because the world of that game is that Mickey's accidentally spilled paint thinner on classic Disney cartoons, and they're all starting to decay and become grotesque abomination. Imagine Sid's toys from Toy Story.
Oh, yeah. Gosh.
and that's all of the Disney characters. Yeah, it completely traumatized our oldest kid when he played it for the first time on the Wii.
Oh, wow.
Because, not to go off on a tangent, but the whole thing is you can either restore the world by using paint and bring it back to life, and you can paint the world, but that's a lot more difficult than just using paint thinner to wipe out the enemies. But your choices have consequences, and so you'll have to see that you choose to defeat this clock tower boss with paint thinner, in which case he becomes hideous and grotesque, or do you use paint to bring him back and restore the tower, even though it's way more difficult.
And speaking of choices have consequences, that's the message of this segment. Because
Indeed.
Mickey decides, I'm tired of hauling water to this well for the sorcerer, so I'll enchant this broom to do my bidding. And of course, you have the dun 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 dun, the marching song of the thing. And of course, it ends up getting out of control when he tries destroying it, and it just resurrects into tons of different marching broomsticks. He doesn't know the spell to undo what he's done. Everything just goes out of control. He can't brute force
his way out of it.
No, he can't brute force his way out of it. Everything goes out of... And it never occurred to me, Victor, until you mentioned it in the notes, that the water animation is actually pretty spectacular.
Yeah, and not only that, the animation of first we get Mickey marching around and directing the brooms, and the robe flowing over him as he's making these very fluid movements. But and then eventually we get so many brooms carrying so much water. Mickey at one point is trying to bail it out of the window. But then the room's filled with water, so we get the brooms carrying buckets of water down into the water where they're submerged, and then dumping their empty bucket or their full buckets into the well, which is already underwater. And just the way the water underwater is rendered, it's very impressive. Yeah.
One of my favorite scenes in this is after and while Mickey is going after the broom, and it starts cutting in and out to black and white.
Oh, yeah.
So when the magic dies, it goes black and white. And then when it starts coming back, you get the little pop of color. And it's, that was just a simple thing to do, but it just made it really stand out. And yeah,
one part that always stuck in my head is when they mesh the visual and the note almost perfectly. When Mickey he's floating on the book in the whirlpool, and as he comes around on the whirlpool, you can see Mickey is screaming, and the music hits a high note right at that point. So the high note is almost like his scream of terror.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And just his dream where he's throwing the stars and comets and controlling the universe. His big power moment.
Only to wake up and find out that everything's gone horribly wrong. The room is flooded. He's, oh no.
Yeah, and then he gets swatted at the end with the broom.
With the broom, yeah.
The animator said they used Disney's facial expressions for the wizard at the end there with his little eyebrow raise. They said Disney used to do that all the time when he was questioning something they were doing, give him a little eyebrow raise.
That explains why in the Kingdom Hearts games, the wizard is actually named after Disney. It's just Disney backwards.
That's right. Yen Sid. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then at the end, we get not the first combining of live action footage with the animation, because that had been done for 20 years at this point with the Gertie the Dinosaur shorts.
Yeah.
But we get the way they did this, combining the animation and the live action into a single photographic negative. It's pretty cool, where Mickey comes out and shakes hands with Stokowski.
We had Mickey's voice before? Or was this the first use of his voice?
No, because there were talkies before this with Mickey. What was great, though, is his last line that he says is, "So long, I'll be seeing ya." So it's, they wanted to make more Fantasia. They were working on more Fantasia. So that was Mickey's, yep, we're going to do more.
Yeah, and Walt Disney had done the voice of Mickey up until this point. I don't know if he was the voice of Mickey here as well. I would assume so, but I can't look that up just at this moment.
So next is my favorite part of the movie, because I was and am a dinosaur nut. And so as a kid, The Rite of Spring was my favorite. It's Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, which I actually read somewhere that when this piece of music was first premiered, it actually caused riots. People did not like this particular piece of music. But I think what they use it for here is pretty incredible. It's set to initially the formation of the Earth. It cools from being a molten ball. Actually, first you get outer space and galaxies and all that stuff. And it zooms into the Earth as a molten ball of lava, and you have the evolution of early life forms. But the real stars of it are the dinosaurs. And I think, this segment probably influenced how the public perceived dinosaurs until basically Jurassic Park.
Yep.
Yeah. And they actually had a very well-known paleontologist as the scientific advisor. It was Dr. Barnum Brown of the American Museum of Natural History. He's the guy who actually he didn't name Tyrannosaurus Rex, but he discovered it. So he was a very famous dinosaur paleontologist, and so they had him as the advisor. So for the time, this was what was known. It may seem quaint to us nowadays how they portray the dinosaurs, but this was how it was known then.
Yeah, I was very impressed coming back to this now, because I don't know if it was this or other things that you saw at the time where like dinosaurs just look completely ridiculous. It wasn't this though, because the dinosaurs were pretty on model for at least the books I had as a kid growing up in the 70s and 80s, which is where my idea of dinosaurs came from. Just to go back, we do see the creation of the cosmos, and I guess they even involved Hubble, the telescope guy, as another scientific advisor, and went up to observatories to view comets and stuff to get but even the spinning galaxy at the beginning that you fly into. And I don't know if there's some note I read where they lost the original footage, but they had used it in something else. And so now the restored version uses the footage from because Disney they'd reuse stuff from picture to picture, but just the spinning thing, it looks as good as, or even better than the intro of Star Trek The Next Generation, where they actually were using like ILM computers to render this.
Yeah.
Because they are using that 7-layer multi-plane camera, you get close-up stars that are rotating at you faster than the stars in the background. And just the galaxy it's maybe 15 seconds at the beginning. Your eye, now you just take it for granted. You're like, oh yeah, I've seen that on all the science fiction shows, but just at the time. And I like the little microscopic organisms too.
Yeah.
There's one fish we follow that as the fish itself evolves to walk on land.
Right. Turns into a
So it's like,
coelacanth and
yeah,
crawls up onto the land.
but we follow it as like its little fish buddies are being eaten by weird jellyfish and other fish, and then it.
What's fascinating is I wanted to put this in context. What else was going on in the world? And I actually searched paleontology discoveries 1930s just to see what was going to happen. First thing that comes up is a Smithsonian article about a discovered living fossil and some woman who was just going through fish nets. I think she was in Africa somewhere.
South Africa.
South Africa, yeah. And she's just digging through and she comes across this, what is this monster fish? I don't even know.
Coelacanth.
That's it. And was just shocked. And it shocked the world just that she had this.
Oh, wow.
This thing was monstrous and it looked exactly
like fossils.
Like our little fish in this show. And I'm sure Disney's group was paying attention to that enough to know this is so popular that they had to put it in there because it looks exactly like it. It's got the little fins that look like they could walk on land and everything. It's really neat to see the way they tie it in. And then, again, this is where the Disney artist had the most fun coming up with ways to illustrate things, like the smoke coming out of the volcanoes. They said that they actually dumped cans of paint into water and filmed it and then flipped the film upside down and made it high contrast for them to colorize it into the smoke that comes out the top of the volcanoes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then the lava in this behind the scenes footage, they show one guy playing with this vat of mud and bubbling it up with air and stuff. You see these huge popping bubbles of mud, and that was how they came up with their lava bubbles.
I thought it had a muddy consistency to it. That makes total sense.
There's a lot of mud.
I just love their Imagineering. That's the big catchphrase with Disney now, that has always been there, always coming up with new ways to make something into a fantastic image.
And you could definitely tell too how it had even an influence on later animated movies. I don't think The Land Before Time would exist without this segment.
Oh, it had
No.
an impact,
So many visual similarities, even in the way some of the dinosaurs look and the kind of moody atmosphere and the darker colors. One image that seemed to really stick with me as a kid was the extinction scene where all the dinosaurs march off into the desert looking for water.
And their death march.
Because I still have photographs of me doing this. When I was a small child, I would recreate that scene on the floor of our kitchen. I would take all my dinosaur figures and line them up and have them march across the kitchen as if they were marching into the desert.
Oh.
So that, for whatever reason, that image stuck in my brain as a kid.
And it's interesting seeing the difference between how it ended up in the film, and then they actually showed sketches in the making of featurette, and the dinosaurs were a lot more real and hard-edged. But it looks like they softened them up just a little bit for this. So it's like Tyrannosaurus Rex, the sketch, oh my gosh, he was frightening looking. So it's like they made him a little cuter, I guess you could say, for a terrible lizard.
Yeah, no, they do have like their mouths are like kaiju mouths. They have these kind of more sculpted, cartoony looking like mouths and muzzles and stuff. We do get that very kind of shocking battle between the Tyrannosaurus and the Stegosaurus, right? Where the Stegosaurus is like, I'm going to hit you with my tail. And then Tyrannosaurus is, nope, I'm going to break your neck.
Yeah.
That's what and that's very, and then of course, as the dinosaurs are all like digging around in the mud, trying to find anything to eat or anything to drink. And here they speculate that there were droughts or earthquakes that killed them off. And the earthquake scene is very cool too. You could tell that had a big impact on, especially it looks Japanese animators of the 60s and 70s, just the fluidity and the not sketchiness, but it looks sketched as the earth is like cracking.
Right.
Yeah. And so then you have all these dinosaurs basically, and then they don't reference our current extinction theory, which is an impact from an asteroid or comet, is what probably killed off the food supply and made life impossible for anything that weighed more than a couple of kilograms. But
yeah, that theory, that wasn't, I think, really developed until the 70s.
When they found the impact crater.
The impact crater. Actually, before that, they had found the layer of iridium in the Earth's crust. A very high concentration of iridium right around the time the dinosaurs go extinct. And they're like, there's only really one way we could get this high concentration of this element, and that's if a really because it's common in meteors. And so if a massive enough meteor hit the Earth and created basically was obliterated itself into this fine cloud of dust, we could get this layer of this unique element in the Earth. And yeah, it's still debated today. It's not like an ironclad theory. Everyone agrees the meteor had something to do with it. The debate is more like, was the meteor the one silver bullet thing that killed them? Or was it simply the straw that broke the camel's back? Like that they were, or the dinosaurs back in this case, because they were having,
in this case, yeah.
There were other environmental factors going on, including volcanic eruptions and stuff, which they kind of reference in this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just love this segment, and because it's dinosaurs and you can't go wrong.
No. Yeah, we don't get any mammals. I seem to remember like mammals coming in here, but then I think I might have been confusing it with one of the Ice Age movies or something. But
they have Archaeopteryx, the quote unquote first bird of it. Some dinosaur ambushes it and it flies away.
And I read that was a conscious decision that Walt Disney said, hey, we could have mammals coming out and take it all the way through mankind. And they're like, no, don't
go there, because it's still controversial and they didn't want to touch that. But after this, we actually get, and I almost forgot to put it in our outline, the intermission jam session.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So they say, we'll take a 15-minute, Deems comes out and like, we'll take a 15-minute intermission.
And I was like, oh no, is it really 15 minutes? And then
in some movies, like when you watch them, I don't know if it's Dr. Zhivago or some of the old movies, they actually had like whole overtures. Well, they're not overtures, but intermission pieces written.
Sound of Music did too.
You get the full intermission now if you watch. But this one, no, they just go to the RKO radio picture screen and then they're back in a few minutes. And so I came running back in. I was like, oh no, are they going to make us watch the tune up again? And they do a little of that. And then they start doing this little jam session where they're like working in themes from Toccata and Fugue. They're working in themes from the Pastoral Symphony. And you're like, hey, this is neat. But just the musicians just sitting there goofing off until they look over and they're like, oh, here comes the man. You got to cool it.
It was nice to hear them cut into popular music of the time.
Yeah.
Getting to more of that jazz swing, big band sound.
Yeah, so it was a really nice intermission. And then Deems says, oh, I was running around the studio a lot and I ran into probably the most famous Disney character of all, or one of the hardest working Disney characters of all, the soundtrack. And he brings them out. Yeah, and it's, if you've spent any time looking at, as I'm looking at right now, audio waveforms and
I thought recorder, of that too, yeah.
Which we get that from oscilloscopes. That's how we originally viewed electricity and any sort of energy like audio. And so we get this really cool vertical kind of oscilloscope readout as different as the soundtrack shows what different instruments look like. But I can imagine for someone with synesthesia, this would be like, you would either say, yes, that's it exactly, or no, this is not. But we do get some really...
they all hit it on the mark really for me. The colors and the sounds and the shapes. It was like, especially the little raspberry when he drops it.
Oh, yeah, it farts is the first thing it does,
Yeah, and what I like too is you're watching this vertical things, but because it's 1940 and they haven't invented perfectly like sterile digital sound, there's like little pops, there's little dust pops showing up in the line as it's sitting there, which I thought was a nice touch too. You're listening to a vinyl record and just visualizing these little pops. And the bassoon comes out and players, and it's very rounded and red. And then Deem says, okay, now let the other shoe drop, which everybody's waiting for is the bassoon to play the really note. And so they show that. I just thought that was like a really nice, if you were still getting a drink in the lobby or using the bathroom and hadn't made it back in, you might miss that, but you wouldn't miss the feature. But it gives a little buffer for people coming back into the show after calling their broker to see if the Great Depression is over or not.
Yeah.
Or whatever they would do.
And I wanted to ask about this because this wasn't in the intermission. It was in one of the interludes before where like some guy, his instrument falls over and there's a lot of awkward laughing. Was that an accident that they just kept in the movie, or?
I think that was intentional. It was the tubular bells guy.
Yeah.
Like the chimes guy.
Yeah.
The chimes guy. Yeah.
It looked like a mix of both.
It might have happened. Yeah.
Because it doesn't seem like it serves any purpose. And I was like,
yeah, it might have happened during one of the rehearsals and they said, oh, that'd be funny. Let's put that in the movie.
That was my theory. Yeah.
Because even Deems looked surprised. He was thrown off like, what's going on?
Everybody looks awkward.
I'll have to look that up. Yeah. When Stokowski was recording this, it was really interesting the way he would have people come into the studio at midnight because he wanted all the musicians to be like really wired and stuff. And so he would record from like midnight to 3 a.m.
Whoa.
these sessions. Yeah. And yeah, it's really interesting. Like I said, if you start to go down the rabbit hole with this, like there's a lot of really good trivia. So I'm very envious of your commentary DVDs and featurettes.
It was like the one reason why I switched over a lot of my VHS tapes that I had bought like pre-kids to the DVDs was they all came with commentaries and behind the scenes. And growing up, I always wanted to work for Disney. So it was my way of feeling like, oh, I'm like part of the gang. Get to meet the artist.
You get the inside story. Yeah.
Yeah.
So next we get Beethoven's Sixth, which is the Pastoral Symphony, which they have set to kind of Greek mythological visuals. And I caught like a few almost like visual cues that would be used later in the Hercules movie.
Mm-hmm.
I know. So like Zeus himself was pretty much identical to the way
he's Rip Torn Zeus in the Hercules movie.
Right.
And little Pegasus. Yes.
Yeah, the big Pegasus looks almost exactly like the way he looks in Hercules. Yeah, I thought that was neat.
And one of the fawns may have grown up to be Sid or whatever the guy's name.
Oh, Phil? Phil, yeah.
Phil, that's it. Yeah, not Sid.
Yeah. He's like a Sid, though. He seems like a Sid.
Yeah, Sid, Phil. But no, in this, the Pastoral Symphony is about living in the country and stuff. And they even acknowledge that we set this in Greek mythology because we thought it would be more interesting. And it is. And this is, I think, the first place where they had to be aware of the Hayes office because this was post-code.
Yeah.
Originally, the Centaurettes, the Centaur's girlfriends, they referred to them as the Centaurettes. They didn't get their little garlands that covered them. They were completely topless the entire time. And they quickly said, we need to dress them up a little bit. And the centaurs themselves look a little bit more physically imposing too, as I understand before. Now they look like there's a Warner Brothers cartoon called The Dover Boys at Pimento University. And if you haven't watched this Warner Brothers cartoon from the 40s, it's because it's not on any of the compilations. It doesn't have Bugs Bunny in it, but it's probably one of the most masterful Warner Brothers cartoons. But it's these very square, proper, like college lads from the 20s. They're very clean shaven and they run around and they try to save their girlfriend. And that's what the centaurs look like in this. They've been like sanitized and cleaned up and they look like preppy 1940s college kids.
I expect them to have football jerseys.
Yeah.
It was funny. One of the animators says the one thing we did that we wish we didn't do was when we were trying to get the walk and the march for the centaurs, we were just out there dancing around pretending like we were horses. And he goes, we could have just got a real horse and had it dance around for us and we would have had much better movement of their legs. It's like they look so clumpy and heavy to us.
You mentioned the horses walking, the Centaurettes. Very interesting. And this is one place where I wish that I would have gone back and rewatched it like frame by frame, but I think I would have gotten strange looks from my family because the Centaurettes, when they walk towards the camera, they're doing that 1940s model, not really a runway walk, but like that hip swinging. And then
it is so Vogue like and McCall from the 40s.
Yeah. And then you could see the animators realizing, wait, they have hind legs too. We need to animate. And so you could see them, I don't know if it works or not, because like I said, I didn't go back, but like them walking, very hip swinging, but then the hind legs following along. And so it's something to check out again. But yeah, I think this is probably like one of my favorite segments. I like the music the most. Stravinsky in the previous one, Frank Zappa, the rock musician and guitarist, was said to have been very influenced by Stravinsky. And I think it was that actual Fantasia thing, because you can hear a lot of Rite of Spring and Frank Zappa's music. But Stravinsky himself he was upset at the way that Stokowski, because Stokowski would edit and shorten and rearrange some of the music to make it fit the animation better. And he was the only one of the composers on this who was still alive at the time and apparently didn't like all the changes that Stokowski had made. But Beethoven didn't have that problem because he was
long dead.
Like roll over Beethoven. No, but yeah. And so we get the cherubs flying around, helping the Centaurettes get ready, the fawns, the Pegasuses, which I thought were really nice. Yeah. And then the centaurs, we get the love story between the blue centaur and the blue centaurette who are lonely. And then, the Pegasus or the cherubs bring them together and throw rose petals everywhere. So it's very nice. And then probably two of my most favorite animated characters in this, just the way they're animated, is Bacchus or Dionysus and his little donkey friend or donkey unicorn. I think he's a donkey unicorn. Yeah. And just the way that they you could tell the animators just had a blast animating Bacchus because, of course, he's drunk when he comes in and only gets drunker throughout the folly.
Couldn't even his throne. He was so drunk.
Yeah. And it's just the way. That's another thing where if you could watch it frame by frame, just those two characters falling over each other, falling over everyone else in the scenery. And yeah, it's amazing. And then we get the other gods coming in later, like Zeus and Apollo and Hephaestus and all of them, or Vulcan. And yeah, there's a lot going on in this one.
My favorite part of this is the Pegasus. I was always a horse lover, still am a horse lover, and just watching them fly and the way that they had them leaping over clouds, even though they don't have to leap, but it's just, it all just works so well. And then to have that final splash down into the water and they swim like swans. Yeah. Just the way the water would spray. Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. Their movement, they kind of combined like horse-like movements with swan-like movements. I thought that was beautiful when they land in the water. I was like, I had to pause it and watch it again. I was like, that was very good.
And there's like little story elements too. There's a little black Pegasus baby he's not as graceful as the other ones. And then at the end, all of his siblings basically do cannonballs into the water. And you're like, oh no, he's going to mess this up. And he does like the most graceful landing into the water you can imagine. And yeah, in terms of like birds, there was another segment that they actually cut for time, fully animated, fully scored on the Clair de Lune by Debussy, I think, which was basically two herons flying around in the moonlight. And it made it into I think, Make Mine music as a set to different music. But I'm glad that they cut that because we get, like you said, the really graceful flying of the centaurs in this. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Zeus being a jerk and just zapping everybody with lightning bolts and stuff and making poor Bacchus run around and fall into the wine. And what I love about that is eventually Zeus gets tired of doing that and just, I'm going to take a nap. But he still has all these leftover lightning bolts that he's just kicking off the cloud or picking up from behind his pillow. And even Hephaestus has one and is, I'm just going to throw this one myself. Type thing. Yeah.
It shows like I'm like, that seems accurate. That's like the sort of mean pettiness of a lot of the Greek.
But it does the way it ties to the storm, because at the end of a really good storm, you get just the last few flashes of lightning and then you get the rainbow, which Bacchus realizes he can drink, and the Pegasus just realized they can ride on. Yeah. So I like that. I think it's one of my favorites, and the whole thing's good, but I like this one.
Probably the one that was probably my least favorite as a kid was Dance of the Hours. I don't know why. For whatever reason, it just didn't click or connect with me as a kid. What about you guys?
It was goofy.
I don't remember liking it as much as I liked it this time. And coming where it does right before A Night on Bald Mountain, it's like that aperitif or that palate cleanser that you need. And it is very like 1930s where it's like, oh, look, dancing ostriches and there's the fat hippo trying to do ballet. Yeah. And that's like how I approached it before. I was like, oh, great. It's just this broad shtick thing, this broad comedy. But if you watch it, I watched it now, I'm like just looking at the animation and approaching it with fresh eyes. I still don't like the ostriches. I think they look a little clunky. But when the hippo comes up out of the thing, and then when the alligators, when Ben Alligator, the main alligator prince, comes out and he's trying to dance with the hippo, and they do some really cool perspective things. There's one where the hippo lady runs to the extreme back end of the frame and then jumps, and you see her kind of coming towards the frame and it crushing the alligator. There's a lot of really nice. And then the elephants come in because this is probably right when they were doing Dumbo, and you can see shades of the pink elephant thing from Dumbo sequence in here. And then eventually the ostriches, the elephants, the hippos, the alligators are all like running around. The alligators are trying to run off with all the other animals. And yeah, it was, and they actually used real ballerinas for reference models in this because it is a ballet. And apparently they were able to find a heavier actress to model as the hippo as well, because that was a bit of a rarity back then.
The animators were talking about this and said that it really was intended to be a satire on ballet, just to be as real as possible and funny as possible. And then one animator said that this was the perfect piece of animation in marriage to the background and music. And after I heard him say that, I went and watched it again, and you literally watch a full day happen. And everything that's happening throughout the day is in tune with the sound of the music, the color of the background. So the waking up to then things getting a little shady at night, and then the way it finishes. And he said it was his perfect piece of animation. He said there's nothing better than this.
Just the cartooning here. It's some first-rate cartooning. Of course, you listen to the music now, and if you've listened to novelty music from the 60s, all you hear is Alan Sherman's Hello Mutta, Hello Fada, which is the kid writing his note to his parents back from Camp Granada.
Yeah.
But then you get the as all the crazy stuff is happening. And yeah, it's something that I didn't really appreciate as a kid, but I like it now, just appreciating like the animation and the cartooning and stuff that's behind it all. The main alligator ballerina, you just look at the way his body contorts and he moves and the fluidity, and yet it's really impressive.
He almost seemed like a Warner Brothers character in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. There was a lot of squash and stretch going on with him.
I loved when he was twirling the hippo. It's like leaning back as far as he can to hold her and then twirl her around. It was such a contrast in size.
Yeah. And from there we go, Deems comes out again and tells us this one might be a little scary for the kids and it might completely give them nightmares. No, he doesn't say that.
Yeah.
Because and that gets back to this wasn't really meant for kids, and most animation at the time wasn't considered a kids thing until maybe sometime after the baby boom happened, which is still in the future when this movie's being made. So yeah, it's so you can have this giant demon raising all these skeleton and ghosts up out of the ground.
Night on Ball Mountain, yeah. And you think, like, it's funny, like, I don't think this really scared me as a kid. And I was a sensitive kid, but for whatever reason, Night on Bald Mountain did not frighten me. I don't remember being frightened by it. But I think maybe also because of how it ends, because it transitions into the Ave Maria.
But watching that demon play with the souls, especially the ones he was dancing in his hand.
Right.
Man, as a Catholic adult now, you look at that and go, oh, Lord, have mercy on me.
And then he crushes them after having them dance for him. He just squashes them like insects.
Yeah, and then you see them morph from beautiful women dancing into animals, into demons, and then he just throws them into the fire. I'm done playing with you now.
Yep. Yeah.
It was perfect to watch on All Souls Day.
We do cover most of the the cardinal sins here. The deadly are represented in some way. The first section where you get the spirits coming up out of the ground, it looks a little dated now because they're not animated. They're just drawings that they've applied like some warping through like the camera lens and stuff too as they come out. But then once they do start getting animated, and they're animated with this, either it looks like chalk or maybe white charcoal and gouache and stuff. And it's definitely very striking. And of course, the demon, they refer to him as Satan in the intro, but later you see him referred to as like Cernabog.
Yeah, because he was also a boss in Kingdom Hearts 1 in the final world.
Yeah.
To fight this guy. Yeah.
It was briefly in an episode of Once Upon a Time, Disney's Once Upon a Time show. Yeah, but no, animated very powerfully, and you could like sinewy, and his face is cruel and malevolent. And I had read somewhere that at one point they had brought Bela Lugosi in, who was famous for playing Dracula at the time, to try and be a model, but he just wasn't what they were looking for. But yeah, and of course now the music Night on Bald Mountain was given a disco treatment in the 70s by Miko, who was the one who was giving all these classical music, like disco treatments. He did like a fifth of Beethoven, which is Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. He did the disco version of Star Wars.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that.
Disco version of this too. So yeah, it's another one of those things where like the music has become so popular that it could take on different connotations than maybe it had at the time. But yeah, definitely very powerful. And then at the end, you have like basically the jump scares, creatures flying into the camera, like faces, weird faces. You get naked harpies, which I guess they didn't care about the Hays Code then.
Right.
Or they're literally throwing it in the face of the Hays Code. They're like, there you go.
Yeah, harpy bosoms. There you go. Yeah, and then what I love about this, we could talk about this, is you hear that first church bell.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly in folklore, the sound of church bells dispels demons. And so the look on his face, it's not fear. It's more like annoyance at the first one. It's, oh, this again. They're going to put me back. And then the second, as the church bells ring more and more on the demons, it does become more of like fear and pain. And I better get back into my mountain here before things get real. Yeah, just that sequence. I think that's probably my favorite moment in the entire piece is when that first church bell starts to ring.
It was classic. Shortly after rewatching this, I'm on Instagram and come across a meme where it shows Mary as Terror of Demons, where she's got her little hammer and a demon in her hand ready to slug it. I love those images of Mary. But it says, where Mary is present, the devil is absent. And that was St. Louis de Montfort. And I was like, yep. And then what happens? You get the Ave Maria. And
yeah. And what they talk about in the intro of this, the Ave Maria being this message of hope that dispels darkness and despair, I couldn't help but thinking, like, what's going on in the world at this time? In 1940, not only is World War II going on, but it's the low point for the Allies.
Yeah, the Battle of Britain had been going on.
France is out. They're done. America isn't in it yet, but will be. And at this point, the Axis is ascendant. Like, that message of hope in the midst of darkness was probably a message that people needed to hear.
Yeah, and it's an interesting choice too. We'll get to the music. This is, I think, the only point in the movie where we hear like human voices is the choral here, and then we have the soprano solo singing the Ave Maria, but it's not in Latin. It's not the German version that Schubert would have used. It's not. There's another English version he wrote, but this is actually written specific. The lyrics were written specific for this movie by Rachel Field, who I guess I don't know much about her, but she was a children's author or something. But she wrote 3 verses for this. You can look them up. Look up Rachel Field Ave Maria Fantasia, and you'll get all 3 verses. We only hear one here, but it's pretty sound hymn, and I'd like to see this kind of come back more and people adopt it as well. But yeah, musically, it's very interesting. Beautiful soprano voice here singing it. And it's all one continuous shot. It's not, we don't get animated characters running around doing antics or bright flashes of color. It's a processional.
Procession, yeah. People with lighted candles. Very simple, but very moving and very powerful.
Mm-hmm. The animators talked about how difficult this shot was to do, that it was 6 continual days and nights filming nonstop, and that it ran the entire 154 feet of the studio to get all.
Because you would have all the painting like laid out, like that one continuous shot where they're walking. That isn't okay. Put in the next frame. Put in the next frame. It's one big painting, and you have this huge rig tracking across it. And it took them 4 tries, right? Because the first try, and it took them like 3 days or whatever to do this first try, and they didn't like it, so they tried it again, but had the wrong lens on the camera. Tried it a 3rd time, and there was an earthquake that like jostled the thing a little bit. It just threw it off just enough, and they had to start all over. They tried it the 4th time, and it was again one of these. It took them a full day to do the shot, and it was literally the day before it was premiering in New York. So they took the film canister, jumped on a plane, flew from Burbank or wherever to New York. Editor there spliced it into the film 4 hours before the premiere. Wow. At least that's the story. But yeah, so it is. Yeah, now you're like, okay, I just have the drawing on my computer and I'll just nudge it over a little bit each time. But now there it is. It's actually like with this huge rig. So any sort of jostling or anything would make it look jittery. And yeah.
And it's so beautifully done. The transition that they did from the trees and then going across the bridge made me think of, I think it was St. Catherine of Siena, talked about Christ being the bridge across the water. And then here again, we have the 3 Gothic arches symbolizing the Trinity. Yep. And so you're getting that very strong Catholic theme. What was crazy to hear was that's not the original visual for the ending of this, is that it was supposed to end where the trees actually morph into a cathedral. And you zoom in closer and closer onto a stained glass window until you are face to face with an image of Mary and Christ. And it was funny to hear the commentator say, that concept wasn't going to work. But it worked much better that they went out into the pureness of nature. And what's more hopeful than the rising of a sun? And I went, dude, that's still Catholic, because a good cathedral is facing the rising sun, representing Christ. The only flaw was letting it fade to black instead of having it go all white.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I guess Disney was afraid of being too overtly like religious or specific religion and stuff. But yeah, and so we do end the film, and the film ends right there. There's no more cutting back to the orchestra. There's no Deems Taylor saying, wow, wasn't that great, folks? Drive safe.
That would have undercut it.
It ends, and you're like, okay, roll credits. Nope, no credits. On Disney Plus, you get the alternate language credits that you get at the end of things. But no, that's the end. Boom.
Yeah. It's amazing to think at the time of turmoil in the world, they needed to just end there. I wish it would have gone to white, because you would feel just such a sense of hope that Christ is coming. There's something better out there in this world. And that would have just been like, a breath of fresh air for people.
Yeah, just a phenomenal film and visual experience all around. I don't think... I know there's the sequel, which I've only seen it like once or twice. But I don't think they've really...
Can't make it today.
Yeah.
They call it like Woke-tasia or something now,
Oh.
right? No, I'm just kidding. But no, it's just putting 1,000 artists working on this for 2 years and the top musicians. It can't be made today. Fantasia 2000 had some good bits. The Rhapsody in Blue section of Fantasia 2000 is excellent.
That's good.
They show that in our kids' music class and introduce them to the instruments and jazz music and stuff like that. But Gershwin, it's even that, where it has a really cool story of these 4 characters coming together with the music and stuff, but still it's very cartoony, animated. The lines are very clean. You don't get that sense that actual artists touch this with their hands that you do with Fantasia.
Oh, to me, that one was the pinnacle. The Rhapsody.
Oh, the Rhapsody in Blue?
Oh my goodness, yeah. First of all,
it's the best part of it's the best part of Fantasia 2000.
I played clarinet.
Yeah.
But that music fits perfectly with the era and the images also fit perfectly with the era that they were demonstrating. Yeah. So it just, to me, it felt like a newspaper of the era come to life.
I was referring more to the production. It's very clean, whereas Fantasia, you can see the fingerprints on like the sculpture more than you can with the digital when everything's touched up and run through.
I do still love finding brushstrokes in old Disney movies. It just makes them so much more real.
Yeah. And then we also get space whales. We get Donald Duck as Noah.
Donald Duck as I think that was probably my favorite part, was the Donald Duck part.
Yeah, and we get Penn and Teller introducing the Sorcerer's Apprentice. So it's very uneven. You get Steve Martin. I did Quincy Jones coming in. I did like that. Speaking of people with synesthesia. But yeah, Disney wouldn't do another Fantasia. They would do popular music, things like Make Mine Music and Melody Time. And then they were in talks in 1946 with Salvador Dali to do an animated short. And even as many times as he would come to the studio, he and Walt just couldn't agree on it enough. Eventually, it was finished in the late 90s, and you can see it on some of the Disney short collections. But it's definitely not the same as a Fantasia.
So, what do you think? Do we have any final thoughts on this movie, or anything we forgot to cover?
I think we should give the final word to Walt Disney. He said, Fantasia is timeless. My parenthetical, or 50, 60, 70. 80 years. It may run after I'm gone. Fantasia is an idea in itself. I can never build another Fantasia. I can improve. I can elaborate. That's all.
Yeah. From the master, I think that's a perfect point in which to end our discussion. But before we do, we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make this podcast possible, including David C., Stephen B., Daniel S., Hillary G., and Joel S. Their generous donations allow us to continue to create the secrets of movies and TV shows and all the shows here at StarQuest. And you can join them at sqpn.com/give. And now we'd like to hear from you, our listeners, about Fantasia. You can send us an email at secrets@sqpn.com or by commenting on our Facebook page or on our YouTube channel or on Twitter. And you can visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. And until next time, Victor Lambs, thank you for joining me in sharing the secrets of Fantasia.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And Kathryn Laffrey, thank you as well.
Thank you. Loved seeing it all again.
And once again, I'm Thomas Salerno. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows on StarQuest.
Here's another show on the StarQuest Network you're sure to enjoy, The Secrets of Sacred Art. Find it wherever fine podcasts are found or at starquest.fm/art. We'd like to thank Patrick McCaffrey of Moonshadow Studios for editing this episode. To have your audio edited professionally and with care, check out more of Patrick's work at moonshadowstudios.biz. That's moonshadowstudios.biz.